For 15 years, Grandma never stepped outside the house. Not once. Not for weddings, funerals, hospital visits, or even the small joys she used to love: morning walks, neighbor chats, Sunday markets. At first, everyone thought it was grief. Grandpa had died suddenly, collapsing right there in the living room, and something in Grandma seemed to fold inward after that. She just needs time, people said. Time turned into months. Months turned into years. And still, she refused to cross the front door. What made it stranger was that she wasn't afraid of the outside world. She wasn't anxious, confused, or weak. She was sharp, organized, fully present. She cooked, cleaned, paid bills, watched the news religiously, and remembered every birthday without reminders. But anytime someone suggested she step outside, even just to sit on the porch, her expression hardened in a way that shut the conversation down immediately. "This house needs me," she would say. "Not I need the house. The house needs me." As children, we accepted it without question. Adults had their odd rules. But as we grew older, the refusal became impossible to ignore. Doctors offered home visits. Family begged. My mother once tried to physically guide her toward the door, gently, patiently, and Grandma had pulled away with a strength none of us expected, her voice low and trembling. "If I leave," she whispered, "everything comes apart." That sentence stayed with me far longer than it should have. The house itself began to feel different. Not haunted, not eerie, just alert. Grandma kept it spotless, but there were areas she cleaned obsessively. The living room floor, especially. She would scrub the same spot again and again, even when it was already clean. If anyone moved furniture, even an inch, she would notice instantly. Once, when a repairman suggested replacing a loose floorboard, Grandma practically shoved him out of the house. After that, no one brought it up again. 15 years is a long time to stay inside. Long enough for routines to harden into rules. Long enough for neighbors to stop asking questions and start inventing answers. Some said she was hiding from something. Others said she'd lost her mind. But none of that fit the woman we knew. This wasn't fear. It was duty. She was guarding something. The night I started suspecting the truth was the night the power went out. A storm had rolled through unexpectedly, cutting electricity across the entire block. We lit candles, joked nervously, tried to make the best of it. Grandma didn't laugh. She went pale. Her hands shook as she gathered the candles and placed them deliberately around the living room, especially near the center of the floor. Then she did something I had never seen before. She knelt down and pressed her palm flat against the floorboards, as if checking for a pulse. I asked her what she was doing. She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered something under her breath. A name. Not Grandpa's. Not anyone I recognized. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of her kneeling on the floor replayed in my mind. The way she had touched it, not like a surface, but like a barrier. The next morning, I examined the living room more closely than ever before. That's when I noticed it. A subtle difference in the wood grain, a section of flooring that didn't quite match the rest. It was old, yes, but deliberately preserved. Protected. When I asked Grandma about it later, she looked at me with a mixture of sadness and warning. "Some things," she said quietly, "are safer when they stay buried." Then she added something that sent a chill through me. "And some promises can only be kept if you never walk away." That was the moment I understood. Grandma hadn't stayed inside because she was afraid to leave. She stayed because leaving meant abandoning something she had sworn to protect. And whatever was under that floor, it was the reason she had given up 15 years of her life. The more I thought about it, the more the house itself felt like a living thing, something Grandma was tending to rather than living inside. After that night of the power outage, I began to notice how her daily routine revolved around the living room floor. She never placed heavy furniture there. She never allowed rugs to cover the center. If someone accidentally dropped something hard, she flinched, her eyes snapping to the exact spot where it landed. It wasn't obsession, it was vigilance. The kind that comes from responsibility, not fear. I started paying attention to the stories Grandma never told. Grandpa's death, for example. Everyone said it was sudden, natural, unfortunate. But details didn't add up anymore. He had been healthy, active. The ambulance report had been vague. And most importantly, Grandma had never allowed anyone to remove the old flooring, even though blood had soaked into it that day. She cleaned it herself, scrubbing until her hands bled, refusing help, refusing replacement. At the time, we thought it was grief. Now it felt like containment. One afternoon, when Grandma thought I was out, I stayed hidden in the hallway and watched her. She moved slowly, deliberately, lowering herself onto the floor. From beneath a loose board near the edge of the room, she pulled out a small tin box. My heart pounded. She opened it just long enough to check its contents before sliding it back into its hiding place. I never saw what was inside, but the way her hands trembled told me everything I needed to know. Whatever she was guarding under that floor wasn't inert. It mattered. It demanded attention. That night, I confronted her, not aggressively, but honestly. I told her I was worried. That 15 years was too long to live trapped inside walls. She listened quietly, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she sighed, deeply, as if releasing years of held breath. "You think I'm imprisoned here," she said, "but I'm the one keeping something else from escaping." The words landed heavy between us. She didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear. Leaving a house wasn't just a personal choice. It was a safeguard. Over the next few days, fragments of truth began to surface. Grandma started sharing small memories, carefully selected, as if testing how much I could handle. She spoke about a mistake made long ago, a decision meant to protect someone that had gone terribly wrong. She never used names, but she didn't need to. Her guilt filled the room like smoke. She explained that some consequences don't end when the people involved are gone. Some require a lifetime of vigilance to contain. The floor beneath us creaked softly as she spoke, as if acknowledging its role in the story. I asked her directly if Grandpa had known. She closed her eyes and nodded once. "He helped me bury it," she whispered. "And he paid the price for knowing." My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Grandpa's death wasn't just tragedy. It was collateral. The house wasn't just a home, it was a seal, holding something in place that should never be disturbed. That night, I couldn't stop imagining what lay beneath the boards. Not just physically, but symbolically. Secrets pressed down by time. Choices weighted by regret. Grandma had given up 15 years of freedom to keep whatever was buried exactly where it was. And the most terrifying realization of all crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor. She was getting older. Her hands shook more often now. Her steps were slower. Her vigilance, no matter how strong, could not outlast her forever. Which meant the responsibility she had carried alone was approaching a handoff, whether she wanted it to or not. And I knew, with a sick certainty, that she was preparing me for that moment. The house creaked again, deeper this time, and I realized something had shifted. The floor wasn't just hiding a secret. It was waiting. After that conversation, Grandma changed. Not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle shifts you only notice when you're already paying attention. She started leaving instructions out in the open. Notes about where things were kept, lists of phone numbers, reminders written in her careful handwriting. At first, they looked harmless, the kind of organization an elderly person might do naturally. But then I noticed something unsettling. Every note somehow connected back to the living room. Which boards creaked the loudest? Which ones had been reinforced? Which corners of the floor should never be stepped on with weight? It was as if she was slowly transferring her awareness of the house to me, mapping her vigilance into my mind. One evening, while sorting through old paperwork, I found an envelope wedged between two brittle folders. It was yellowed with age and sealed with tape instead of glue. Inside were documents I had never seen before, old land records, police reports, and a single handwritten statement signed by Grandpa. His words were shaky, uneven, but deliberate. He described an incident from decades ago, something that had happened in this very house long before I was born. A man had come looking for someone. Voices were raised. A struggle followed. The details were sparse, but one sentence stood out, underlined twice. We had no choice but to hide what remained. I felt cold reading it. Grandpa's handwriting wasn't the kind you use lightly. This wasn't exaggeration or drama. It was a confession, stripped of emotion, written for necessity. The police report that followed was incomplete, missing key pages, redacted in places that mattered most. An unidentified disappearance. A case quietly closed. The address listed was ours. The date matched the year Grandma first stopped leaving the house for long periods. 15 years wasn't just when she refused to leave, it was when she fully committed to staying. When I asked her about the papers, she didn't deny them. She sat heavily in her chair, hands folded, staring at the floor as if she could see through it. She told me the man hadn't been evil, not entirely. He'd been desperate, reckless, driven by something he believed justified his actions. That desperation had brought him to our door. What happened next, she said, was an accident layered on top of bad decisions. No one had intended for it to end the way it did. But once it did, there was no undoing it. Only containment. She explained that burying what remained wasn't about escaping justice. It was about preventing something worse. The man had been involved with others, people who didn't ask questions and didn't forgive losses. If it became known what had happened inside this house, they would come looking, not for answers, but for retribution. Grandpa had understood that immediately. They had reinforced the floor themselves, sealing the space, disguising it so completely that even inspectors would overlook it. From that day forward, the house became more than shelter. It became a responsibility. I asked her why she didn't turn herself in once time had passed, once the danger should have faded. She shook her head slowly. Time doesn't erase connections, she said. It just buries them deeper. She told me people had come back before, asking vague questions, circling the neighborhood, watching from cars parked too long on the street. Every time, she stayed home. Every time, she made sure the house looked lived in, stable, unchanging. Leaving would have been a signal. Movement draws attention. Stillness keeps you invisible. The weight of it all pressed down on me harder than I expected. Grandma hadn't stayed inside because she was trapped by guilt alone. She had stayed because she understood something most people don't. Some dangers are only contained by consistency. By being exactly where you're expected to be, every single day. 15 years of presence wasn't imprisonment. It was camouflage. That night, as I lay awake, I heard something that made my breath catch, a soft, hollow sound beneath the floorboards, barely perceptible, like a shift caused by temperature or settling wood. Rationally, I knew it was probably nothing. Houses make noise. But nothing felt harmless anymore. Everything had meaning now. Every creak, every shadow, every vibration carried history. The next morning, Grandma surprised me by standing near the front door, her hand resting on the handle. For a brief moment, I thought she might finally step outside. Instead, she turned to me and said, "Soon, I won't be able to stay anymore." Her voice was calm, resigned. "And when that happens, the house will need someone else." She looked down at the floor, then back at me. "You need to decide if you're willing to take my place." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because beneath the weight of fear and responsibility, another truth was settling in. Whatever was buried under that floor wasn't just a secret of the past. It was a countdown. After Grandma said those words, the house felt different, as if it had been listening all along and finally realized it had been noticed. She didn't explain what she meant by taking her place, but she didn't need to. The implication wrapped itself around my chest like a tightening rope. That afternoon, she led me to the living room and pointed at the floor, not dramatically, just a small motion of her finger, precise and practiced. She told me that beneath one specific section of the boards was not just a body, not just bones, but evidence of a chain of events that never truly ended. The man who had died here hadn't come alone into this world, and he hadn't disappeared alone from it either. People had been connected to him, people who believed debts outlived death. She finally told me how Grandpa died. It hadn't been natural, not entirely. Years after the incident, someone had come back pretending to be a utility worker. Grandma had been suspicious, but Grandpa had been tired of hiding, tired of watching, tired of living inside the same walls like a guard who never slept. He let the man inside. There had been a confrontation in the living room, right above the reinforced section of floor. Grandpa didn't survive it. The official cause was listed as a heart attack, and no one questioned it because that was easier than digging. Grandma understood then that leaving the house wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. From that day on, she never let another stranger cross the threshold. She showed me the tools hidden behind a false panel in the hallway closet. Old, rusted, but carefully maintained. Not weapons, maintenance tools. The kind used to reseal, reinforce, and restore the illusion of normalcy. She explained that every few years, she checked the floor, adjusted supports, ensured nothing shifted enough to draw attention. The house had to age naturally. Too perfect would invite curiosity. Too broken would invite inspection. Balance was everything. Survival lived in the details. What broke me wasn't the violence or the fear, it was her matter-of-fact tone. This wasn't trauma she was reliving. This was duty she had accepted. She had raised children, buried a husband, grown old, all while anchoring herself to this one place so the past wouldn't crawl back into the light. And now she was tired. Not weak, tired in the way only someone who has stood watch for decades can be. That night, the sound returned, louder this time. Not a creak, not settling wood. A knock, dull and deep, echoing upward through the floor. Grandma didn't flinch. She sat in her chair, eyes closed, breathing slow. She told me it happened sometimes when storms came, when pressure shifted underground. But her hand tightened around the armrest just enough to betray the lie. Whatever was down there wasn't just decomposing. It was changing. The next day, a car parked across the street and didn't move for hours. Grandma noticed immediately. She adjusted the curtains by half an inch, turned on the television for background noise, and resumed knitting like it was any other afternoon. She told me this was how it always started, stillness testing stillness. Someone seeing if the house would react. Panic would confirm suspicion. Routine would erase it. That evening, she collapsed. Not dramatically, quietly, like something finally powering down. As I waited for the ambulance, she grabbed my hand and whispered the last instruction she would ever give me. Never dig, never remove, never confess. The truth isn't what's buried, she said. It's what happens if it's uncovered. She died before they arrived. After the funeral, the house was silent in a way it never had been before.
No knitting needles clicking.
No humming from the kitchen. Just the floor beneath my feet, steady and patient. I understood then what she had meant. The house didn't need an owner. It needed a guardian. Someone predictable. Someone present. Someone who would never give the past a reason to surface. That night, I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't turn on a light. I stayed exactly where Grandma would have stayed. Morning came, and the street was empty again. I never left the house after that, because some secrets don't stay buried on their own. They need someone standing on top of them. Weeks passed, then months, and the house slowly adjusted to my presence the way it once had to Grandma's. I learned its rhythms, the exact hour the floorboards sighed, the places where sound carried too clearly, the corners that felt heavier than others. I stopped inviting people over without ever consciously deciding to. Excuses came easily. Work. Distance. Life. The truth was simpler. The house didn't like witnesses. And neither did I. I kept Grandma's routines alive not out of superstition, but because they worked. Curtains angled just enough. Lights switched on and off at precise times. A lived-in illusion that whispered normalcy to anyone watching. Sometimes I caught myself listening to the floor the way she used to, lying awake at night, counting seconds between sounds, decoding meaning from silence. I told myself it was paranoia, grief reshaping my thoughts, but deep down I knew better. There were nights when the house felt alert, almost expectant, as if it sensed movement far beyond the walls. On those nights, the floor felt colder under my feet, harder, like stone instead of wood. And once, only once, I felt a vibration travel upward, subtle but undeniable, like something below shifting its weight. The car came back one winter morning. Same spot. Same stillness. I didn't panic. I brewed coffee. Opened a book. Let the hours pass untouched. By dusk, it was gone. That was when I understood the true inheritance Grandma left me. Not the house. Not the land. But the responsibility of being unremarkable. Of never reacting. Of being the quiet constant in a world that hunts for change. I never dug. Not an inch. Curiosity visited me often, especially in moments of weakness, when I wondered if facing the truth might free me. But Grandma's words echoed louder with every passing year. Some truths don't liberate. They multiply.
They spread.
They demand answers no one survives giving. Whatever lay beneath the floor had already claimed enough lives, enough years, enough silence. On the 15th anniversary of Grandma's death, I noticed a new crack in the wood, thin, hairline, almost invisible. I fixed it the same way she would have. Slow, careful,
Permanent.
As I worked, I realized something chilling and strangely comforting. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a border. A line drawn between what the world was allowed to know and what it never should. I don't know how long I'll stay here. Maybe 15 years. Maybe longer. Maybe until someone else learns to listen the way I have. But I do know this. Grandma didn't refuse to leave the house because she was afraid of what was under the floor. She stayed because she knew what would happen if no one did. And now so do I.